I'd like to ask the crowd to please settle down. Just relax. Yeah. So I guess we'll get started, so keep things on time. Hopefully others will come and join and revel in the great learnings that we're going to throw out there. So very quickly, actually I will get you guys to introduce yourselves, say a couple of words, and yeah, so Matthew.
Yeah. Thanks. Good to see everybody. Matt Nordgren, founder and CEO of a fund called ARCADIAN, amongst other things, a platform for investing in the space.
Gary Allen, I'm the COO of New Frontier Data, big data analytics company, helping report and disseminate information in the space.
My name is Mike Harden. I'm the founder of Big Rock Partners, and we're a strategic advisor, and we work with investors and companies in the cannabis space, and focused around the intersection of cannabis, food, and hospitality.
Yeah, thank you very much, guys. Today, so I'm Damon Goodwin. I'm Vice President of Civilized. Today on our conversation, we're going to talk a little bit about markets, talk a little bit about the big growth opportunities, how do you vet the right investments, what kind of qualities or brands, or what are you looking for in an investment. So to kick it off, why don't we just start with kind of, and I'll throw this out to the group. How big is the market right now in the cannabis space?
I think the data team should address that.
So we have it at 22 billion plus over the next few years, 12 billion in Canada over the next few years.
Do we really know the size though? Like, I'll put that out there. I mean, we've got some numbers. I think it's interesting to talk about the U.S. market, the Canadian market, which might be a little bit further ahead. But like,
yeah, we were having this conversation earlier, and as with any early industry, you only have a few analysts who are actually following it and throwing out projections. So, as we've gone through and invested and helped other people invest in various cannabis companies, I've yet to find or see, even in the publicly traded data, companies that are doing over $100 million in revenues. I mean, I think if you look at a Tilray, you look at all these guys, they're coming up around 30 or so. So I'm hard pressed to find that the actual number is 5 billion now, and how, because that's thrown around as the legal amount. But I don't know. I feel like there's an iceberg here, and I haven't seen an analyst in any other community be able to actually dial in things from early cell phone days on and on. So I challenge us, and I'm happy that Gary and his team are working on a better set of data, because in order to be able to invest in this space, you've got to have at least a baseline understanding of what's really happening out there. And I don't know, I'd check us all to question that.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of numbers that are really important, right? The number that is generally accepted and published is a consumer purchase number, right? So that's how much the consumer is interacting with the market. Right? There's a couple of other numbers that, one, we don't spend a lot of time at New Frontier Data looking at the illegal market, only because the only way to really quantify, there's no real way to quantify it in a manner that would allow us to keep our reputation, right, and allow us to keep our validity in the market. But I think the economic impact, right, what are the other vertical markets, how does this market affect and influence, energy, right? We just put out an energy report. How does it affect, dirt and pharmaceutical, alcohol, tobacco, right? The economic impact number is something I think that's really interesting and really needs to be vetted more, and something that we're really taking a look at in New Frontier.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on that. And I think you have to think about this industry and compartmentalize it in certain ways, because if you're talking about cannabis, you probably have a different answer than if you're talking about cannabinoids, right? Are we talking about hemp now, or do we include GW Pharma with a $5 billion market cap by itself? I mean, if you throw in potential medical market, which is growing quickly, if you're talking about concrete and textiles and fabrics, how big is that? Who even knows? And we're going to be able to announce some things in India and China very soon that are going to open up their consumer markets to hemp byproducts, both over the counter and whatnot. So now you got 3 billion additional people. How big is this thing? Who knows?
So I think that's an excellent point. You know, the where will the market be, right? So we've got the, you know, size, we're figuring that out in the various locations, but you know, Canada going recreational federally, a lot of support, seems to be a neat ecosystem. Certainly a lot of money being invested there, but of course maybe regulations change that and it goes elsewhere should that happen. So where are you guys looking right now locationally? And Matt, maybe, I mean, you already talked about India and China. What other markets? I mean, Germany, Australia, the U.S. You know, when will the U.S. be the ideal market?
Great question, and part of the reason we try to present ourselves as a professional fund manager, because these are the toughest questions to answer, and predicting what markets are going to evolve and how is really the name of the game. I see some familiar faces in here that run other great investment vehicles, and that's our job, right? So if you look at India and China, they're a long way out from having recreational cannabis flower, right? But if you think about the hemp business, I mean, I think they unfold actually really quickly. And so you have to look at various markets. Data and reports are really important to any industry, this one becoming very important. So I think you have to really think about the market, where they are, how it's going to unfold, and then ultimately how does that play into the big picture?
I don't know. I think that's an easy answer, and I think it's California. California grows the best cannabis in the world, and Northern California grows the best cannabis in California. And it's pretty simple. We also grow 60% of the United States artichokes, asparagus, and all other green vegetables and herbs. So I think also, given the arbitrage opportunity with what you see in the public markets for Canadian companies who are serving a market for the entire country that's not as big as the market of California alone, and not as sophisticated consumer in terms of the types of brands and the number of cannabinoids they're consuming on a daily basis. I think it's pretty easy that there's a great opportunity to invest in California cannabis companies and with that spread between here and what's public.
Agreed.
So you like California, do you? Yeah. I think you know what, Mike, I think you actually bring up a good point. I think it's a good. There's a good analogy between, you know, we bring up Canada, right? People think that Canada is more sophisticated because there's more participation, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's more sophisticated, right? There's a capability for American money and Canadian money to go into Canada and be more public, and therefore learn quickly, learn publicly, become efficient, become productive, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean it's far and away more sophisticated than the U.S. market, right? California's been doing this for 20 years, right? Now, California is a great example as well, right? So in an opening statement of not understanding where the $5 billion is coming from, but in the marketing statement, we're a $5 billion market, right? Market cap, I understand.
Versus revenues.
That there's a lot of efficiency and understanding that isn't in the market yet. And I think that's what you were talking about earlier, right? Being able to collect the right data and really take a look at each market entry as a vertical market or as an ancillary product or ancillary service, and understanding how it affects the entire market is going to be really important in each individual investment.
Yeah, one other point on that is just the sheer volume of California, right? When you put it into numbers, again, Gary said this, if you go back to Canada, there's 33 or 4 million people there. Not a lot of tourism. In California, you've got close to 40 million, but you have 250 million people that are here every year. And so if you're trying to scale a business, this is the market you have to do that in today. If you're a data company, a software company, a media company, it's the largest addressable market in the world.
I would say over the next, going back to the conversation of economic impact, and you've seen it start with Coke and Pepsi and now Walmart, but over the next 5 to 20 years, just like in the late 90s when you had to announce your internet strategy, every Fortune 500 company will have to announce their cannabinoid strategy, whether it's Estee Lauder or Ford or any of these companies. How are you going to interact with them? Either it's your employees, or it's you and you're going to be adding them, et cetera. So all those companies are going to have to go somewhere for that data, and right now or that knowledge, they're going to have to go to Canada for the financial industry knowledge, unless we get our act together here as the U.S. But they'll have to come to California for a lot of the other knowledge.
They can come to New Frontier Data.
Or New Frontier Data.
So you guys mentioned sophistication of the market, and I'd like to just dig a little bit deeper. I mean, a lot of people talk about the intelligence of the market. Is it a smart market? Is it a dumb market? Is the market dumb? Is the investment dumb right now? And comment. Matt?
Well, let me just do a quick poll. That. Is there anybody here from Goldman Sachs? Raise your hand. Is there anybody here from Merrill Lynch? From Morgan Stanley? JP Morgan? Nope.
Is there anybody here? No. Okay.
But that's a good question, Mike. How many people here operate a cannabis business? And how many people are investors or looking for opportunities in the cannabis business? Wow, actually twice as many investors. That's great data for us up here to know how to talk. But I think the answer really is, I see some other fund managers here. You're starting to see so much money chasing this space. When we're talking to companies, we're doing our best job to try to come to a rational valuation for these businesses. And when you have all this capital coming in from all over the place, that can help drive valuations to unrealistic places and take money in the wrong time frame. So, we hate using the word dumb money, but in some cases, that's what ends up happening. And we have to be really careful to self-regulate this industry at this point in time, make sure companies grow right. The other thing that happens is if you have an opportunity to take synergistic capital, smart money, you can get a lot more value out of your investor as you grow your business. I think it's attractive to take some of these big valuations and some dumb money, but if you get the right investor, take the right terms, they're going to be very helpful during your growth process and making sure you do certain things right. So it's a real term and it's meaningful.
I also think, and we were talking about this earlier, I think that if the entrepreneur is building a company to fill a gap in the marketplace and to address something that's a need, and as opposed to building a company for an exit, right? So if you're building a company and you're trying to find a value exit from day one, most of your investment decisions are going to be based on who can get you to that valuation. If you're building a company to service a market need, your decisions are going to be a little less based on a higher valuation, a little bit more based, hopefully, on strategic money where the investor can actually help you get there and not just give you money.
And I think if you go case by case on individual names, yeah, you can definitely see a wide gap between revenue and market cap. But we'd also talked about earlier, that's a function of the lack of available investment opportunities in the space, and that's being solved over time. But that said, I'm not real worried about valuation of the overall space or excitement in it because of the fact that none of those people we mentioned earlier are here. And even though we've got some great new funds in the space, all combined, I think all the money, if you add up everybody who's raised a legitimate fund, it's still less than Sequoia's latest fund by probably half. That's going after a lot of traditionally and less exciting and less growth things. So I'm not as worried about the excitement and the new investment opportunities, but I do think that we owe it to the investing public to create more vehicles that they can invest in, get a more diverse array of cannabis companies, and that seems to be happening, but there's only a couple people who can even bring you public in this space.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I'd like to take a minute now and just kind of talk about the trend, right? Like, so where are we seeing the trends go? So is it trending towards, do you think, consolidation? I know a lot of people are talking about in Canada that there will be a lot of consolidation happening. Bruce Linton specifically said he's waiting for the bloodbath. He won't make any acquisitions or partnerships. Rather, he's just going to acquire the leftover on a fire sale. You guys want to weigh in on trends that way?
And then we had MedMen and PharmaCann acquisition today, $682 million for PharmaCann.
I think it's important to think about statements like that and where they come from. Bruce Linton is a master, but again, if you're a founder or CEO of a public company, the things you say and the way you say them have a different meaning because you're trying to set trends, right, by being the oracle of truth for what's going to happen, and then people buy into it. Private company founders and CEOs tend to say things a little differently, but both important to think about. Just understand what their goals are.
I think at the beginning of any kind of the end of the first generation of any mature market, right, as it's growing, there's a consolidation period, and I think people are talking about it because it's sensational in Canada, right? And I think there's, as you said, where do these statements come from? Investment companies and public CEOs, they need that buzz around their name, and they every day they have to think of IR, right? So there's going to be a lot of, Canada's going to have a bubble. There's going to be a bloodbath, things like that. Those are sensational things that the market will respond to in the superficial. I think underneath it, on the consolidation question, we see at New Frontier Data, we're talking about we're talking to other tech companies, and they're talking to us. We do a lot of data aggregation, and so we do have some exposure on what's going on in the market, and there is definitely consolidation, and people are talking about consolidation. You guys have participated in some of that, right? But I think that the big sensational statements about the consolidation are usually just that.
Yeah, I think as a trend, consolidation is somewhat interesting. That said, I look back at craft beer in the 80s, and we'd gotten down to 4 major brewing companies in the 80s before the laws changed. And then I think Lagunitas just sold within the last 2 years for $3 billion. So if you'd have gone back 20 years ago and said, what's beer going to look like? Everybody was completely wrong. I think the most interesting trend in cannabis is the cannabinoid piece that Matt mentioned earlier, and I look at my own personal consumption of cannabinoids and what I've been replacing in my daily regimen, whether I'm kicking out Advil for THCA or whether I'm getting rid of melatonin at night for CBN. And I look at all those things about what people would have predicted. What's a cup of coffee going to cost? If you'd have told me I'd be standing in line for 20 minutes to pay $5 for a blue bottle, I'd have said you were nuts 20 years ago. It's a commodity, same as chocolate. And yet there I am standing in that damn line. For the special coffee treat. So I feel that like the most interesting isn't the same as craft beer and the others. I think the most interesting trend is that we don't even know. You never knew what app was going to be hot on the app store. It was just that it was a platform. Cannabinoids are sort of a platform to come in and replace a lot of things in your life, whether it's the petroleum-based antibiotic that you spray on your livestock that you could replace with antifungal THCA, or whether it's CBN for nighttime or THCV for some kind of appetite suppressant. That's the trend that I think is going to be the most exciting.
Yeah, I think this notion of consolidation sometimes is seen negatively. I mean, it really is just M&A in an emerging industry that's happening really fast. It's a necessity for companies because you can be doing a lot of things right in your business, and you're scaling, and you're raising your A, and you're going into your B, and all of a sudden you look up and think, oh my goodness, how many more companies are trying to do what I'm doing? And how long do I have to get to scale before my potential exits? And again, you want to build private companies and not be concerned with them, but you need to be aware of them to the point that you've got to make decisions, buy versus build. And we try to help our companies a lot think through that. But you're going to find in every one of these market-leading companies that they have to make a decision. If we're going to keep up with how fast things are moving and try to keep our position in the space, do we keep trying to build? Do we buy some smaller companies? So I think you're seeing that out of necessity. And Mike and I were involved in the High Times acquisition, and we've been pretty quiet as a private company, but as a public company, we'll probably be a little more vocal. But ultimately, that business is looking to, out of necessity, go out and try to provide resources to the industry in the form of capital and other things in order to try to keep a good market share for investors to see a big platform to go do that. I think it's a very important thing.
I also think, Matt, I think that's a really good point. And I think that one of the things we actually were talking in the preparation of this is we have the benefit of 2 or 3 emerging markets over the last 20 years, right? So we have the benefit of helping shorten our learning curve, right, and understanding what is true consolidation, With the buy versus build is a great example, right? That equation, now most CEOs, CFOs, COOs, CTOs can do that equation pretty much in their head, right? Obviously, there's going to have to be, due diligence, and there's going to have to be some modeling, but pretty quickly somebody can get to this is going to cost me a lot less to buy it than it will for me to build it and try to gain market share. And I think that one of the benefits that we should, as a marketplace, really focus on is shortening that learning curve by watching the .com, alcohol, even the .com deregulation, looking at those emerging markets and how with the mistakes they made and the speed in which they had to move, or the slowness, and really helping us shorten that learning curve.
And it's another the consolidation's another reflection of the lack of capital market opportunities there are. So if you're a California company or a company in Colorado and you don't have access to the public markets, and here's someone with a multi-billion-dollar market cap but very small revenue, well, that's just an easy, fair trade that we've created through regulation. When that capital market access opens up to American companies, et cetera, I think you'll see more opportunities. And you look at the early days of the internet, you had IACs and these roll-ups. But then look at the first $2 trillion companies. They've all been built in many of our lifetimes over the last 20 years, Apple and Amazon. And we've seen them both go from trading near cash to literally $1 trillion. And they haven't really had a giant roll-up strategy. But that's because they've had access to capital and they've had strong balance sheets. But if you're only, going back to the earlier conversation, if you're really only making 20 or 30 million in revenue, but your market cap's several billion, the only thing you can do to grow into that market cap is get more revenue. And the only way to get it faster is to roll things up.
Yeah, very bang on. If we look at the different segments, right? If you're looking to put money in a certain segment, or a certain segment's going to grow, and let's take the four kind of traditional ones of medicinal, which would be kind of the pharmaceutical grade, the nutraceutical side, which is still health, but maybe more like vitamins, that type of thing, on the cannabis side, recreational, and then industrial. Right? Because industrial is certainly an area that I don't think we talk enough about. You guys want to weigh in on which one of those areas do you think would be is going to be the one where you can make the most money from an investor standpoint?
The answer really is all of them. There's so many amazing people doing so many amazing things all over the world with these plants right now. And so you kind of have to, I think, one thing we keep seeing with great people is they get distracted. A lot of opportunity out there. So I think you just have to figure out which one you're good at, focus, and have a very clear vision and story as to what you're doing, because the answer is really all of them. If I had to pick right now, I think you got to get pretty excited about brands, which I think is really driven by the bioscience and some of these molecular formulas that great science people are starting to come up with, and then ultimately the delivery methods. So you can kind of own IP in different ways, but I do think you're going to have to own some IP behind a differentiated product, whether you're in Walmart or Home Depot or over the counter or behind the counter at CVS. I mean, any product category is pretty much open at this point, but I think you have to have more than just a name and revenue. I think at some point you're going to have to really have some IP.
I would say, and I've been thinking about this for a while, but it keeps coming to mind that the pure, and we've done a lot of stuff in in synthetic biology and life science as well. And when I look at the path to creating a life-saving drug, it is long. It is multiple years and multiple phases. And there's a reason why biotech companies get snapped up by big pharma. It's because it's outsourced R&D. And so when I see a company, as you do some who are working on, we've got durabinol and marinol for synthetics, but on the THC side, but we don't have a great synthetic CBD or CBN or CBG, et cetera. So with the people working on those, that's literally 4 to 5 years away from an actual drug, I would say. Whereas in the rec market, if you want to call it that, you could have that product out now helping people, et cetera. So I don't know, I toy with that, and because at some point I think cannabinoids are good for you in a lot of different ways and indications, and it doesn't really matter, across the board. It does, right? Because you can tell the difference and taste the difference. But on the whole, if you go from if you're, iron deficient, anemic, and you start from 0 iron and you add some, it's good for you overall. So I feel like there's this interesting path, and I think over time we won't see this market as rec, medicinal. It's sort of crazy already. We've got this world that we lived in, and it doesn't make sense anymore, and so I don't have recreational vitamins and medicinal vitamins. They're just all vitamins. They're all good for me.
I think also that the conversation around the consumer products, right? The platform now, CBD is a platform, and the derivatives that come from that. I think that's kind of one part of the market. We were talking earlier, though, as you asked about industrial, right? The secondary markets for hemp, for example, right? So what do they do with the biomass after they've cultivated it, right? As an electrical and mechanical engineer, I get really excited about what you can actually do with carbon fiber made from the hemp stock, right? And BMW's already using it for door panels, right? For silencing door panels in all of their cars right now. There's a company, and we won't mention any names, but there's a company in Manila right now that builds CPU cooling systems that has replaced 100% of graphene with carbon hemp, right? And so, your original question, where are you going to make the most money? I think you've heard 3 different kind of approaches, which is, there's 5 million other ones, right? But there's the capitalism, there's the consumerism, and the medical, right? And then there's the industrial. And I always, as an engineer, and this is Gary talking, not New Frontier Data, but as an engineer, I always go for infrastructure and picks. You know what I mean? So.
Very, very, very cool. Right now, Gary, you'd mentioned a little bit earlier about what we can learn, that we have to learn from the other folks who've been through it. CPG, alcohol, tobacco, pharma, technology. What are some nuggets, or what are some nuggets that from those folks that we should specifically be learning?
So from my own career, in my, as you said, the Amazons, the Googles, the Apples, they're all from our lifetime, right? And having not only been involved but helped shape the Internet 1.0 and mobile banking and things like that with my career, I think the biggest learning that I take kind of every day into what we're doing as a company is to build that company, right? To instead of looking at, we're a data company. New Frontier Data is a data company, right? It's a pick and a shovel as pure as it can possibly be, right? An infrastructural company. We should be the nexus of the industry, and we will be someday, right? And therefore, we should be, back in the internet days, we would be commanding huge valuations, not because of what we're doing today, but because of the hope and dream of what we could do in the future. And having been through that, I think one of the things the fastest thing for us to learn and shorten that learning curve is to understand we're here as a company to fill a gap in the marketplace. There's good investors, researchers, lawmakers, pharmaceutical companies. Everybody who's going to interact with this marketplace needs to understand what the market is truly doing. And to do that, they're going to need good vetted data sources. And so if we continue just on that mission, raise the professionalism, talk about what's going on in the industry in a professional manner, and continue to fill that gap, our exit, our value, our revenue, those things will all come from just being smart, dedicated, diligent people.
My biggest takeaway from it all is from having seen, Internet 1.0 and 2.0, and then all these different little subgroups like a craft beer thing, or all the different trends that we've had, even on a local basis in the Bay Area, that have been exported nationally. The local organic food movement, a lot of those things that were birthed here and in LA and in New York that went out and kind of met and took over the middle of the country, is that you can have a lot of influence, especially if you're in one of these cultural centers. So for me is that, wow, I just went along with some of those things, but wasn't in the position or have the confidence or knowledge to actually influence and to sort of live in the future that we want this industry to be. We've got an opportunity to create a new corporate culture. I remember moving here in the 99, 2000, and all the articles were about how at Google you could wear a t-shirt and how they had a slide to get to work. And I'm like, geez, that's amazing. And then I see what has become from where I had been. And so these people had this whole, they were open-minded to change something as basic as how you worked and whatnot. And I think we have that same opportunity here to even correct and build on all the different things that tech fixed, but then new problems that they created. And I think being an ag-based business, but that has this big economic impact, allows us to actually be thoughtful and shape that future, because it's not as hard as you think it is.
Great point, Mike. And I think all of us that care about this industry take that to heart, which is nowadays you see most of these other more mature industries trying to reverse engineer themselves and figure out how to put women in important roles, and discrimination of different kinds, and in the environment. I mean, cannabis is in a really unique position to be able to take all those things into account as we build it. So, I mean, you hear this talked about sometimes as the last bipartisan issue of our lifetime. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's a big industry that we can do things right. So I think Mike is correct on that, and important to reiterate. But the other thing that we take away from some of these other emerging industries that we've all seen, this one is a little bit different in that it's a perfect storm of opportunity in a lot of ways. I mean, a lot of these other ones, and all emerging industries have regulatory things to think about, but not all of them have been around for hundreds and thousands of years, right? And so to a certain degree, you got to have a little bit of risk tolerance is probably the appropriate way to put it up here, because it's a regulatory environment that you have to be concerned with. But this is it's a really interesting emerging industry that I think is a little bit different than just the ones we've seen before, although you can draw a lot of similarities. Is this stuff helpful for everybody? We work really, really hard up here. We spend a lot of hours, so being able to talk about your work is awesome, but making sure people care about it, it's a lot of fun.
So when we talk about this speculative, your company should be valued more if it was a tech stock in the 80s or 90s. There's a lot of companies that do have very big speculation around the stock and values that are absolutely speculative. And a lot of people talk about, the bubble. The bubble's going to burst. What is it going to burst? Do we mitigate that? How do we mitigate that? Mike, you want to?
Yeah, I mean, look, there'll be cycles up and down, I guess, is the lesson from 500 years of trading and whatnot. But when you also look at it, going back to Apple and Amazon, there's a lot of consternation about what the internet was going to be and how big it was worth. And here's two companies, both worth $2 trillion combined, just again within an hour's drive of here. So I look at the total market cap of all cannabis companies, and I think it's, if you added them all up, 50 billion max. That's probably even overstating if you got GW, Tilray, all those guys. And yet it's something that we talked earlier about. What was the price? What did you think the price of the iPhone came out in 2008? And people thought the price by 2017 of an iPhone would be down to $100 or $50, like the start tag. Instead, it's $1,000. It's more every time. So I don't know. My ability to predict a future of specific things has been very nil. But knowing that people will be consuming more cannabinoids in 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years is pretty is definitely guaranteed. I think.
Yeah, and again, talking about markets always figure themselves out eventually, right? I mean, if you think about the food chain of investors all the way up to the biggest money there is, money chases deals. And so when you start looking at these markets, they haven't had a chance to majorly correct yet because the big money still doesn't know what's happening, and they're having to buy in. I mean, think back to we keep talking about internet, but it is applicable. When the big money came to internet, what did they want to do? Did they want to buy auto.com? Was it cars.com? Was it trucks.com? I mean, they didn't know. And so if you're big enough, you buy them all, and eventually the markets figure themselves out. But if you're big enough, you can kind of get through that. I think cannabis is going to have a couple of these. Certainly, these types of businesses are a little bit overvalued as compared to other ones like it, not in cannabis and agriculture, brick and mortar retail and manufacturing from a multiple on valuation standpoint from markets, but they'll figure themselves out and we'll be fine, but it's nothing new.
Well, I also think that, back to what we were talking about, what do you learn from previous markets, right? And this is one of the downside. What we're talking about right now is one of the side effects that's negative in my opinion, and that is that we're all trying to have a crystal ball, right? Because of what the internet did, because of what alcohol did, because of what biotech has done, right? And Matthew, I think you brought up a great point earlier, and that is this is a unique market in so many ways. That while a little bit of the tech model will work and a little bit of the pharmaceutical, maybe a little bit more than a pharmaceutical model will work, right? The combination and understanding of all of those things are the only things that are going to allow us to do any type of predictive. And at this point, I think the answer to, will the bubble burst? I think both Mike and Matthew said it. Markets go through their cycles, and why should we think this is going to be any different?
And when you look at cannabis, it's really, there's a lot of lenses on it, but one lens to look at it from an economic impact is that it's both creative and we're creating entirely new industries, but it's also competitive and an alternative to a lot of things. So I don't know if alcohol consumption will rise or fall if you'll be using both, or if you'll go to a wedding and you'll have Lagunitas Can of Craft's Hi-Fi beer that's just sparkling water and hydrating, but has cannabis in it. I don't know what those things will look like in the future, but you do have cannabis coming in and competing with other markets like alcohol, like pharma, but then also expanding lots of markets like the legal market and the law firms and whatnot.
Yeah, so on that one, Mike, I think it's a great point, and I think that there is a great deal of sharks kind of circling the industry waiting for the right moment. You do have CPG that is kind of gently looking for ways to get in. You have pharma like Servier, like Sandoz, who've made entrants.
Are you saying CPG's a shark?
I'm saying they could be, or maybe they are, maybe they aren't. Do you want to weigh in on that?
Well, I guess one of the things, sorry, we've talked about this earlier, right? Listen, I think I've been in this industry for 2 years now, and I've been lucky enough to be with New Frontier Data, which is very much the center of information, right? So I've been able to, my education has been painful and broad, but to think that pharmaceutical hasn't been looking at cannabis for 30 years is a mistake. To think that beverage companies haven't been looking at cannabis for the last 10 years or 15 years is a mistake, right? I think for us to consider CPG, pharma, alcohol, sharks that are somehow waiting to gobble up those things that we hold so dear is a mistake. I think it makes us immature as a market, right? We're building businesses, and we're building, Matt, your fund is investing in businesses that are going to build that foundation for other businesses to participate. And I think to think of it in any other way, it really kind of makes us very small.
It's accurate, but what you have to try to figure out is still they make a move at some point, right? And you saw Constellation, they said, okay, we'll try 300 million or something, get a look, 400, let's get a look under the hood, and then 4 months later, right, they write a $4 billion check, and it's not because they didn't work really hard and have a lot of smart people for a long time, it's because they felt like the time was now. And so I think you will see a lot of that happening. You read about it all the time, how it unfolds. None of us have a crystal ball, but it's certainly something to be thoughtful about when you're making investments as to when those people are going to make their moves.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and that's a right stance as an investor. You don't want to be arrogant about where the bigger competitors and the bigger players are going to be, et cetera. That said, I just spent time in Newport, Rhode Island. I went and toured that Vanderbilt mansion, and it was all railroad family. And then listening to the audio tour, but they missed the pivot to autos and airplanes, right? And so you go in, I'm like, so I never want to underestimate. And I go back to the internet days, and Amazon and Apple are new companies. Now Apple's a converged company. It was in the PC world, but not many people actually came in. Walmart.com is still not that great, on and on. So not many of the bigger retailers, Sears, I think, just filed for bankruptcy, and that's been a 20-year decline as Amazon rises. So I look at those, and I don't want to be arrogant about it from from an investment perspective. That said, I also don't want to underestimate the power that the negative cannabis dogma has had on people. I grew up in a dry state, so when I saw people, I think I said this last year, drinking the devil's juice on baby Jesus' birthday, I was sort of freaked out. I was like, that's shocking. And so, when I went to Amsterdam and saw cannabis for the first time, openly sold, it wasn't as big a deal because the whole alcohol thing had already blown me away. I had no idea that some of those things were spiked anyway. And so I feel like a lot of the world still has that dogma on it. Some really smart investors, some really smart branded companies, et cetera. You can look at that right now with the lack of brand sponsorship. And it's because brand sponsorship even has a real consequence. Goldman Sachs can't throw their name on here because they might get some charter pulled and on and on. And we're all probably still dealing with, even just being up here, still on this stage in this day and age, has an impact on your banking and on all kinds of other things. So it's hard to be in a bubble, and it's hard to do a lot of those when those restrictions are still there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and you talk about the examples of the big companies that maybe aren't hopping into the space because of stigma or other reasons, and I think of other reasons. I mean, the people who came up with quartz technology approached Rolex and all the Swiss watchmakers who famously turned them away. Western Union could have owned the phone, but thought it was a bad idea at the time. Sears could have been Amazon, but wasn't. So I think there's a lot of reasons other than stigma, but I think stigma is a big one. Yeah, so go ahead, Matt.
Well, no, I was just going to say, I mean, you see the new news that Walmart might be selling products in Canada. I mean, not only is that an important thing to know as an investor or someone involved in a business, but the fact that a company of that size is ready to go. Maybe Sears ought to be thinking about it.
Last ditch Hail Mary.
That's actually pretty smart. Someone should go pitch him that. Have you seen this new thing that they pitched Trump's team with the building the wall in hemp concrete? It is unbelievable. I mean, it was a joke, really, but if it meant to be a joke rather than a real business plan, but it's well thought out, and it does things like, hey, how about you build that wall for 1,000th of the cost? Hey, how about you make a wall that's environmentally friendly? Hey, how about you can bring it all in from Mexico and they can, it's really funny. You're right, but some of this stuff is just really important to be thinking about, the way it's said, the way things are going. These are all great points.
Yeah, cool. So let's make a little shift now and talk more about the qualities of the companies, that you look at. Like what kind of qualities? Are you looking for someone with a big war chest so they can weather a storm? Are you looking for, them on a specific exchange? Is New York better than, the CSE or the TSE? When, why, that kind of thing. But what are some of should you be a global company, right? Or should you be California, 100%, right? So what are some of the qualities that you're looking at when you're thinking about investing in other companies or acquiring other companies? Like, Mike, you want to?
Yeah, and so we're a little different, but we've looked at the world, and I think a lot of what you see out in the public markets now is the Folgers coffee. It's original. It's helping to meet a mass market. I think that you see a lot of companies coming up behind it that are the Pete's or the Lagunitas, that next generation, and we're trying to focus. And you already see great high valuations in there, and people have created a lot of wealth on paper, and that's awesome. And it's attracting more people. We're focused on sort of that next generation of cannabis company looking for the next blue bottle, looking for a company that's going really deep in craft, really deep in terroir, somebody that owns, and that does tend to be California. It's hard to find that history. This is, for us, where we look at that, again, that intersection of cannabis and hospitality. This is the most exciting market in that space, and I guess you would technically call it the rec space, but I disagree. But because we, as Americans and as Californians, own that space. Have you ever seen that movie Bottle Shock about the. Anybody seen that? It's about the the wine industry in California. They had to go compete in Europe and prove themselves. And here we have this booming wine industry here, and has surpassed most of Europe. And we're exporting to China and have our own brands. Well, guess what? California already owns that place in history. You can go in now to Spain and Italy, and it's Cali cannabis. Even in Amsterdam, most of the seeds and strains are all coming from here and have crossed out. So this is a place where we own that. We're not going to have to fight for it. We have to fight to hold it and fight to build it, and that's by going deep with terroir and paying attention to the strains and to really building that that heritage here. So I think that's a tremendous opportunity. It's there for us to have, and so we're trying to invest in brands and companies that are going deep on that side with reasonable valuations, and hopefully they're the next Blue Bottle or Hermes or whatnot, somebody that's really doing craft at a level. It's an authentic product, not expensive for the sake of being expensive, but because people have loved it and touched it all the way through.
I mean, I see New Frontier Data's logo on everything, so I assume they're doing pretty good. Happen to know the business pretty well, and they are doing amazing things, obviously. But you got to really look at yourself and identify what type of investor you are, which would change your answer. For us, we really look to invest in companies with a bit of growth that have had some success and proven a few things. And so we really look for revenue to start, because I think that's a big differentiating factor in this space. A lot of great ideas, still early. A lot of them will make it and a lot of them won't. With a bit of revenue, you can kind of see where people are and how they're doing. And having an idea and making it a reality and then getting sales and generating revenue every month for years is a different deal, right? So for us, we want to see some revenue, and then ultimately, what does that mean in the form of market share? Depending on your vertical and where you are in the maturity of this industry, it'll be different, but market share is important if you're a matured company. And then I think, and this is every industry, but you've really got to get comfortable with management. There's so many things that are going to continue to change in this industry daily, and no one's expecting you to do everything perfectly. Things are going to happen, fires are going to start, and I think more than any industry that we've been in, this one, the management team becomes critical in the success of a business.
So I think for New Frontier Data, we get to see a lot of these requests, right? We deal, our client base is really investors and mature companies coming and looking inside the market. And so what we see is for us, it's always data and technology, right? How can the aggregation and the analysis and then the dissemination of information improve the marketplace, and how can technology make those efforts that much more efficient, right? And then how do we produce that for investors and for funds in such a way that it's easy to understand, but gives them the depth that they need to protect and help inform their investment.
Yeah, information gathering, research, changing the evidence that we have, or the conversation being very fact-based. I think it's kind of an interesting area. You look at Tilray. Tilray recently did some news about shipping product down from Canada down to San Diego for research. They didn't mention what the research was for, what kind of research, when it was starting, any of that, and they noticed a significant bump on the stock exchange. So how important is research, and what are some of the ways, whether that's consumer or medicinal, or what are some of the different areas of research that are needed and that will help shape an investment decision?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think first and foremost, it's still some sort of standardization and some sort of dictionary or some, glossary that an entire industry can understand, right? So you asked research. So for medical research, understanding the strains and what the strains really are, understanding the data around and the product of manufacturing. How do we get that manufacturing to be always the same, come up with the same result, right, and make it efficient. I think for investors and for researchers, it's always going to be what do the individual markets, what data is available in the individual markets, what data gaps are there, And then how does that change the analysis? So we talked about this in Canada earlier, right? So in Canada is a great example where it's federally legal, it's moving to rec. There are state agencies that are supposed to collect data, and as you know, being a Canadian company, that some of those agents, that one particular state agency, while they have the mandate to collect data, they don't. Right, they don't want it. In the medical side, they're moving away from really medical nomenclature and trying to push people more into dispensaries for recreational, and they're using medical and rec. And so I think the research needed and the data that the market needs is some way to normalize all of the different nomenclature that's being used.
I look at I love the financial research that Gary and that team are doing in New Frontier, because that's what, like I said, in order to make proper investments over time at real scale, you've got to have a base knowledge, you've got to have indices, you've got to have all those different ways to benchmark how's this industry growing versus the other. That's just a basic tool of when you talk about the medical research side, it just blows me away, because I'm trying to figure out what kind of research do we need. The same people who've been doing the research on opiates for years, who told us to take those and not cannabinoids, are the same people who told us to. So I don't really know what it is that drives that research industry, unless it looks like it's just bodies piling up from fentanyl and things that will require. I don't know how much more research you need in that space, and who rubber stamps it. The Israelis have been doing, other people have been doing. I think the research is there. I think it's just the research community needs to be more comfortable and competent and confident in presenting that research and really taking a stand. But it's tough as a doctor or anyone else to actually go out on a limb and make that. It's still easier to write a script for Oxy today than it is to send somebody to a dispensary in states like Tennessee or Texas.
Yeah, medical research is obviously important, and a lot has to be done to flush out what's what. But all we try to do is follow on with Mike and Big Rock team and Emily Paxia and Poseidon, and just try to figure out what other smart investors are doing, and we'll just try to do the same. No, but this industry is different because from industries we're all used to being in, you've got a tremendous amount of data. I mean, if you're at a big financial institution and you want to go do real estate deals, I mean, my goodness, how much research do you have? You could find anything you want. That doesn't exist right now, and I can't tell you how many times we get calls from big banks and big law firms who may be taking one of your money out here just to figure out, hey, what's really happening on this particular vertical? What are these two companies doing? I mean, we're like, hey, you're getting paid to answer that, so I think that the information is really hard to find, and the real information is even harder to find in this type of an industry where it's unregulated, and a lot of companies don't have to report. New Frontier has been a driving force behind that, a company we're involved with called BDS Analytics. I mean, these real data sets, no matter what you're trying to do in this industry, are so important right now, and that research is critical.
I think that's a great point, and I think that we, especially for us, if we had 3 times the staff, we still couldn't do enough research fast enough, right? Because as Matt said, financial markets, real estate markets, power and energy, all of these other mature markets have decades upon decades of research that has been done and vetted and understood and built upon, right? Hypothesis upon hypothesis. We can't get it fast enough. We're trying, right? We can't get it fast enough, but it's so sorely needed by every vertical.
And at the end of the day, that's the opportunity for investors. The money and the margin is in that mystery and in that gap between what other people know and what you can learn.
We agree that the opportunities at New Frontier Data, we absolutely agree with that.
Which is there. You bring it out, we'll buy it. And that gap that you see now in some of the private companies that are doing good work and growing versus that public, there's a huge spread there. So.
Do you guys like our background music? We planned this.
Yeah.
It goes along with our financial conversation here.
Yeah. It's got a beat. You can dance to it, right? So.
Well, and I think one other real quick point. Matt was just talking about BDS and New Frontier Data. We're 2 different companies that do different things. We have to work together in the marketplace, right? There's no way, again, for us to get enough research done and enough data stored and normalized, and for us all not to work together.
Right on. We're right around the 10-minute mark or so, or 5-minute mark. Okay, so we can open it up for some questions if there are a couple. If not, I'll ask another one while you're thinking. Regulatory. So the regulations around cannabis and the United States still having federal illegality. That's shaping a lot of decisions about where to list, where to RTO, that type of thing. Care to comment on that? Like, will it change here with a change in government kind of immediately? Do you think it'll change with the existing regime? Want to comment on what'll happen there?
Obviously, the number one most important thing to pay attention to, depending on where you are, but I still think that is the name of the game. Understanding your regulatory environment, how that's going to change things. Unfortunately, politics exist in large part for a business. We wish they'd serve people more, but you're starting to see politicians. I can't tell you how many times we sit next to a politician who joins a board of a company and you want to ask them, well, what made you change your mind? Oh, I just had a difference of opinion, right? I mean, okay, right, that quickly. But those things are really important. We're winning that conversation across the board right now, and I think we'll continue to. And just understanding how that plays out and what that means to your business, I think is the most important thing to try to figure out and predict.
Every industry has had, cannabis certainly has very unique ones, but every industry has its own regulatory environment that can be a competitive advantage if you know how to use it right, or it can run you over if you don't do it wrong. Even and I think the best way to make sure it's there is to have all the players in the market and have the right tension and the right communication line. So government regulators, even labor, which is is another force in this industry that that one day will be represented in a different way, and the companies. So I think getting those channels up and getting those tensions between them to be solving and having everybody at the table is probably the most important.
Listen, as with everything else, as long as you have the information, right? As long as you have the data, you understand regulation, you understand politics, you understand, those individual, your original question of the individual markets. I think as long as you have that information, all of those choices can be made as long as they're made smartly. And I think in this industry, over especially the last couple of years, we're noticing much more data-driven decision-making instead of mood and feelings.
Yeah, I think that's good for everybody. We have one wonderful question coming up.
It might not be wonderful. You just amped
come
me
on.
up.
That'd be great.
Okay. First off, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing. I think it's really important. I think I've had the privilege of working in lots of different industries, and one thing I will say about the cannabis industry is everybody's striving to do the right thing. Right, and that's really special. That's a really special space to be in. And I'm curious, from your perspective, as the gentleman on stage, reflecting back on sort of Andrew Carnegie's idea that it's the people who are successful, it's sort of a responsibility to make sure that we're giving back to society. And I'm curious, as you guys are thinking about how we are collectively in this boat together, ensuring success for everyone, how you like to see participation in those who are successful manifest in terms of philanthropy or activation in the space. So I'm building company. I think a lot of people in the space are building company. And as investors, are you looking for like philanthropy wings? Are you looking for political activation? Like what ways is in people in business participating and contributing back into the industry?
In general, we want to find people that care, right? And everybody has a different business, but care about the environment, care about other people. And the reason is because the cannabis story is one of the narratives always about caring about something, having a purpose. And so I think it's really important that you brought that up because that can be in the form of female empowerment. Great to see you run a business. In the form of the environment, in the form of persecution for color and religion and these things. I think the cannabis industry doesn't see color. I don't think the cannabis industry in large part sees men or women is different, and it's a really special thing, and I think all of us up here can agree it's part of the story of what we're all doing.
Yeah, It's interesting. We talked earlier about trying to create the future you want. Even our company, Big Rock, is run by Joyce Williams out there. And we looked at our portfolio, and it's not because we tried, and it wasn't even a thought, or maybe Joyce was, but we look at our portfolio, and out of, I think, 7 or 8 names, about 6 of them are all female-led, and that's not, wasn't by design. I think it's just a function of, while there still needs to be work done in the industry, every cannabis event I've been to, whether it's Amsterdam's anniversary or events like this, it's always the most, cannabis seems to bring people together. So I think, and it has created interesting opportunities for leadership, in that it is a Wild West. So it's about who wants to dive in and take that risk and have their own angle on it. So I think that a lot of it is just trying to protect what's already there, which is, I would like to argue, is a better industry than others. Protect it as it gets pushed and pulled by different sources. I think in terms of actual giving, especially for we work most of our time with entrepreneurs or with investors, and a lot of it is creating a great company and a great culture that's going to grow and hire tons of people. Going back to the Amazons and the Apples and the Googles, those trillion-dollar companies have had a significant impact on how on how people work, and on what kind of work-life balance they have, and on whose leadership, who's leading the company, and where voice is heard. So.
Yeah, I'm just, great answer, and I think exactly kind of what we have to do as an industry. I would point to what's happening with the Global Cannabis Partnership, which is a global framework around corporate social responsibility that includes things like diversity in the workplace, environmental stewardship, sustainability, traceability, protecting the consumer. And it was created, I think it's about a year old now. 26 companies, Consolidation brands, Canopy, Afria, Aurora, it's got McCarthy Tetro, law firms, that type of thing. So 26 companies or so right now, and they're building that global framework and looking for partners and membership in the Global Cannabis Partnership. You can Google that, and I think you'll see a lot of what you're looking for if you go to that website. Yeah, Global Cannabis Partnership. And I think we're out of time, unfortunately. But I want to thank the participants of the panel. You guys are really easy to work with, because you just have to throw out a little question and they handle it. So thank you very, very much, and thanks for your attention and for coming to our panel.
Thanks for moderating as well.